Hi, my name is Tim. I'm an astrophotographer based in Sweden, and you are watching Cosmic Captures. This is the first episode in a mini-series about my experience with Comet C2023 A3 Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. I had the opportunity to photograph the comet from different locations with different setups, and every time it was a totally new experience. And that's exactly what I would like to share with you in these videos. So we will look into my challenges, how did I photograph the comet, the gear that I used, and I will also share the main processing steps that I used during editing. So without further ado, let's revisit my first evening with the comet. Have you ever had a picture in your head and you knew exactly how and where to get it? You pack all your gear, you're super prepared, you leave your home early, and then something gets in the way. And that's exactly what happened during my first opportunity to photograph the comet.
At the moment I'm running a time-lapse of the Öresund Bridge. I just want to use the time that I have here. I've tried to photograph the comet for a couple of nights already, but there were just too many clouds and I didn't have much luck. But tonight is different because it's almost clear. There are a few clouds on the horizon, but they shouldn't interfere too much, and I'm really looking forward to it. I cannot see the comet yet, but hopefully that will change soon. Should be somewhere there. Let's see if I can see it.
And that was the moment when I finally saw the comet. But I also realized that I would not be able to get the image that I had in my head from this location. So I dropped everything, packed my gear, ran back to the car, and drove off to find a better spot.
Yeah, what a not so successful evening. I've had great plans to shoot the comet, but the first location was totally off. And I'm still not perfectly aligned with the comet because my dream scenario was to have the comet line up with the Öresund Bridge. Of course, it would have been possible to plan that, but originally for tonight I had totally different plans because I wanted to go to a nature reserve and shoot the comet from there. But the motorway was closed off because there was an accident. So I ended up driving back to Malmö and trying to shoot the comet from here. The camera here behind me is shooting a time-lapse right now. I have no idea if this will end up in a usable shot. I think the time-lapse will look interesting, but that's not at all what I had in mind for tonight. Anyways, this is astrophotography, so there's stuff that gets in the way. Whether it's roadblocks, whether it's clouds, whether it's live. Yeah, let's see how the editing goes. I'll see what I can do with the material.
Before I show you how I've edited the material from that evening, I think it's a good idea to briefly talk about the gear that I've used. For this shoot, I used a Sony A7R Mark IV with an f/e 1.8 85mm lens, also from Sony. I used the lens wide open at f1.8 and I shot at ISO 200. Originally, I wanted to put the camera on a star tracker, and that would have allowed me to compensate for the rotation of the Earth. But since I had to change plans twice that evening, I decided to keep it very simple and put the camera on a static tripod with a ball head and shoot a time lapse with 5-second exposures. Because I knew that I could use individual frames from the time lapse and stack some of them to create a better quality star and comet image. And that's exactly what I did. Now, to the editing. But before I dive deeper into that, I want to say two things. My astrophotography journey started with deep sky astrophotography. And that means that I used a small telescope to photograph nebulae, star clusters, galaxies, things like that. And over the last 3 years, I captured and edited a ton of these images. And I learned how to process stars, process nebulosity to bring out the most information in the image. And I want to bring that skill set into my landscape astrophotography. Then the second thing is that what I'm going to show you is not a step-by-step tutorial. So I'm not going to show you how to do specific things in specific software. But what I want to show you is how I think, how I approach and edit an image like this. When I start with any kind of astrophotography image, I always begin with looking at the raw files. And if I just open one of the many time-lapse frames and zoom in a little bit onto the comet, then I can see two things. The first one is that the stars in my image, they are not round, they are not pinpoints like they should be, they are streaks. And that is due to the fact that I've used an 85mm lens and I exposed for 5 seconds. And that is already long enough to make the stars appear as streaks. And that's simply due to the fact that the Earth is rotating and the stars are moving in the sky. The second thing that I see is that the image is rather noisy. And I can improve that by stacking a number of frames, and by stacking I decrease the noise levels and I also increase the signal levels of the stars and the comet. And I did just that. I took 40 frames, loaded them into my favorite stacking software, which is Astropixel processor, and I started stacking them and I got a warning saying only 4 or 5 frames could be stacked. Strange. It always works, so I tried again, got the same result. I even tried a different software with the same result. It wouldn't work. And then I looked at the image and it kind of dawned on me after a while. I was like, wait a minute, all those light poles, all those lamps on the bridge, they look like stars. And perhaps the software only gets confused because we have moving stars in the sky and we have pinpoint light sources on the bridge. So what I did is I separated the top part from the bottom part of the image and I only stacked the top part with the stars and the comet, and it worked flawlessly. I then processed this image in a software called PixInsight, which is a special software for astrophotography. There I did two things. I separated the stars from the comet because now I have two different images that I can manipulate and blend separately, and I also improved the star shapes. The way I started in Photoshop is this. I used 10 or 15 frames from the time lapse and stacked them on top of each other. And that resulted in an image that looks like that. I had to clean it up a little bit as well, but you get a very smooth looking result because the stacking mode that I've used was the average stacking mode, so I only get average values from each pixel in the frame. So all the movement in the water disappears, the cars that drive get blended together, stars disappear because they change position from frame to frame. This serves me as a kind of a canvas, and I can use the stars and the comet and blend it with that background layer. Yeah, so I add the stars and I can work with the brightness of that layer. I can make them brighter, I can make them less bright, whatever I want. And I can do the same with the comet. And the final step is just fine-tuning, where I adjust the levels of different elements in the frame. I work with saturation, I work with the colors. I can do many different things depending on what I feel looks nice or looks best. Now, when I look at the final image with a little bit of distance, I just can't help it but think, it's not exactly the image that I had in my mind, and I'm not super happy with the composition. But despite all of that, it's not like what I said earlier in the video.
Yeah, what a not so successful evening.
I think every time I go out, I learn something. And even if I would have returned with images that were all blurry, then I would have learned that, well, next time pay more attention to the focusing. So there's never wasted time, and especially in astrophotography, it's constant learning, it's constant improvement of your technique. And I'm really happy that I was able to be there, to see the comet hanging over the bridge, to photograph it, to document that moment. But what do you think? Do you like the image, or have you perhaps had similar experiences? It would make me very happy if you share your thoughts in the comment section below. And that concludes the first episode with Comet Tsuchinshan-ATLAS. I hope I'll see you in the next one, and until then, I wish you clear skies.